The idea of having a camper van of our own was planted during our travels in New Zealand in 2023. Almost right away, after returning back to Finland, we started making plans for our own van, but we weren't sure if we could actually build it ourselves. Finally, in late March 2024, after a lengthy period of investigation, we pulled the trigger and bought a Citroen Jumper with nothing inside. So we'd build it ourselves. This is the story behind how Lantti the van was built. It all started by taking everything inside apart. This included removal of wall panels, partition wall, and by far the hardest part, the factory floor, which was glued very tightly to the metal frame. By the end of the first weekend, most of the interior preparations were done, but the car and its value had literally taken a hit.
La la la.
Springs in Finland often come with setbacks, and this spring was definitely a slow one. Snow and cold weather made it not exactly pleasant, but we had just started and were too eager not to push on. Along with some leftover preparation tasks, we had to do something about the now freely vibrating metal surfaces. To dampen the vibration noise, we attached heavy bitumen sheets on the metal surfaces. After a few days of what felt just taking steps back, it was finally time to move forward and build something new. The floor. For floor insulation, we used PIR boards. We decided to use 20mm thick boards to avoid eating up the interior height too much. On top of the insulation, we placed 15mm thick weather-resistant plywood to even out the floor. Using the original factory floor as a model, it was quite easy to shape the plywood pieces for the floor. After a few iteration rounds and having sealed the gaps between the battens and the insulation boards, it was time to place the floor pieces in their place. Once the floor was done, work continued with insulation of the walls, for which we used the same material, PIR boards. The 50mm thick version fit perfectly into the wall cavities. At this point we had had the car for a few weeks and got off to a pretty good start. We had stripped and cleaned the interior parts, built the floor and insulated parts of the walls. The next tasks were something we wanted professionals to take care of. We'd already been in contact with a Tampere-based van workshop called Vanset, so that's where Lantti was heading next. While Antti was at the workshop, we headed to Japan for a few weeks. After over a week in Tokyo and Hiroshima, we rented a camper van to explore the more unknown island of Shikoku for 10 days. As we returned to Finland, summer had finally arrived, and our car was waiting for us at the workshop. Our car had a new cool window, solar panels at the roof. Yep, the window, you could actually open it, a rooftop fan, and a diesel heater. Ahead of us was perhaps the most challenging and complex phase of the project. As we continued working with the insulation and later with wooden framing, we had to consider, for example, where we wanted our pieces of furniture to be in the end and how we would attach them to the frame of the car. We tried to avoid damaging the metal frame of the car by using rivet nuts to attach wood framing, for example. This wasn't always possible though. Regulation for registering a car as a camper van is quite strict in Finland. The interior height, for example, has to be at least 185 centimeters, which is why these frames had to be installed on the sides of the metal beams. Every centimeter counted. We would also do wiring for electrical appliances and connections during this phase, meaning we had to decide wire lengths and thicknesses based on the devices we'd be using in the end. As for ceiling insulation, we used a self-adhesive Armaflex. It's quite expensive material, but for ceiling it's definitely the way to go. We were constantly working with multiple things. The insulation, wood framing, electrical wiring, etc. All this was new for us and we could feel the complexity of it all getting to our heads at times. Despite only being able to work with the van after workdays and during weekends, we made pretty good progress with all this groundwork, and simultaneously the plans for what to do next started to clear up. Next in the backlog, we had the ceiling. As material for the ceiling, we used pine sauna panels. We drilled holes into the panels for spotlights and shaped them to fit the ceiling, around the fan for example. We were expecting this to be tricky, but in the end it was a fairly straightforward process. With all the vibration in a home on wheels, you have to use screws instead of nails to attach anything to the frame. This proved to be probably the most tricky part when attaching the panels to the ceiling frame. How to tighten the screws without cracking the panels. Finally, we treated the panels with wax to give the panels a nice look and prepare them better against the unavoidable temperature and moisture fluctuation. A big chunk of planning time had been spent on the electrical system. At this point, it was finally time to put it all into practice. We had identified the shelf in the garage area surrounding the left rear wheel as a perfect place for the electrical devices. Our 100 amp-hour lithium battery would be placed next to it, and most of the cabling could be placed inside the shelf, out of sight. Having a fan and lighting in the van on top of the freaking good looking ceiling felt like the biggest step forward at the time, if not in the whole project. To top it off, we were about to get another pair of helping hands. Let us introduce you Santi. Santi joined our family as a 7-week-old puppy, and obviously we had to ease up a bit with the building project. However, he was being familiarized with the new surroundings from the start, including the van and the hardware stores, and soon we were able to continue with the van build. Where were we? Right, the ceiling. So next, the walls. Sounds simple, but it was anything but. What made it complex is basically us being amateurs. Well, there was also the issue with the width of the car. A Citroën jumper is as wide as a van gets really, just below 2 meters from interior wall to wall, but you want to maximize the width, especially if your bed is sideways at the back like in our layout. Here's how we tackled this. We crafted a recess in the plywood walls on both sides, about 5 centimeters in depth. What made this possible is that instead of 50mm thick PIR insulation boards, we only used 20mm thick boards in these areas. In the process, we installed reading lights and a LED strip at the ends of the bed. The end result, while not perfect, was very valuable and something we were quite proud of. On the right, the wall reached out to area that would be kitchen. There, we embedded small shelves into the wall for spices, for example. After the complex bed walls, preparing the other parts of the wall was a much simpler task. With the walls done, it was time to prepare the bed, which consisted of 3 beams and a rack, all standard IKEA bed components. In the end, we measured the bed to be 192 centimeters long, which for us was enough. After the bed was in its place, we built a high cabinet on the left side, which would also act as a space divider between bedroom and living room. One of the most important and expensive appliances, our 12-volt fridge, was placed in this cabinet at waist level so that it's easily accessible. We were about to head to a family meeting for a few nights, and for us this was a perfect time to test things out. We cut the mattress to the shape of the bed, laid the bed sheets, filled the fridge and headed to Pohjanmaa. Obviously, it was Santi who stole the show. As for the van, everything worked as we had hoped. The bed was long and wide enough and very comfortable, while the electronic devices and the system as a whole worked perfectly. We also got good feedback and assurances that it would be capable to provide us energy for all our needs in the long run. Back on the sketchboard. On the left-hand side, we'd next build a living room. The living room would contain 2 seats with a height-adjustable table in the middle. In addition, we wanted to make it possible to move it down between the seats and convert the setup to a sofa or a second bed. This required some framing preparations on the walls. We modified the smaller seat next to the fridge cabinet in a way that you could extend it. On the other side, the seat was more like a bench really. The table would also be extendable to make the secondary setup almost a full-sized bed if needed. For the table, we'd use proper 18mm oak wood and wax it to make it last and give it a nice look. The seat and the bench faces we'd decorate with finger panels. The straight parts were easy enough. The difficult part was to make the curvatures. By carving out grooves between the fingers just 1 or 2 millimeters from splitting the panels in half, we were able to make them curved just enough to fit around the corners of the bench. We'd attach the finger panels to the frames of the seat and the bench with a nail gun. Pretty much the only nails we'd use in the whole project. We thought it looked amazing. We'd later install LED strips under the panels to finalize it, but even now we were so excited. Overall, the interior of the van was really starting to take shape. Our kitchen would be placed on the right-hand side. With that, we decided to take a shortcut called IKEA. With their endless options, we were able to design a cabinet that would fit our layout. We were also convinced that we'd avoid a lot of frustration this way. Assembling the IKEA cabinet felt quite a simple task at this point after all. And we were not wrong. All we had to do ourselves was to build a simple plinth under the cabinet and shape a kitchen table with a hole for the sink. And just like that, we had a kitchen in the van. Obviously, it took its time to get to this point, but it was relatively simple. The water system in the kitchen was very simple. We had one 25-liter canister for fresh water and one for grey water. In the freshwater tank, we'd have a submersible water pump that would provide water for the faucet when switched on. From the sink, the grey water would be drained down to the grey tank through an odor lock. In the meantime, Ida was working with cushioning for the seating with her mom. To cushion the seats, we used foam mattress, which would be enclosed by bedspread cloth and cut into pieces that could be used as seating pads, as well as to form the mattress for the secondary bed. It was already almost October. With winter approaching, the days were getting shorter and shorter and the weather was about to get worse. We still wanted to get one more thing done, a cabinet above the kitchen and the bed. With 6 square meters of interior space, you really want to make the most of all the space that's available, and this upper cabinet would go a long way of doing that. It was not easy. There's literally no straight lines in the van, and it took countless of iterations to get the dimensions right for the cabinet to fit the corner of the ceiling. Eventually, we had the right sized parts for the cabinet and we were able to assemble and paint it. Luckily, we had made no brain farts with the measurements and the cabinet slotted nicely into its place and it was fairly easy to attach it to the framing with screws. Here's what we had achieved during the summer. We estimated that we were 80% there, which was pretty much where we hoped to be at this point when we bought the car 6 months earlier. Altogether, we had already spent hundreds if not thousands of hours in planning, going to hardware stores and actual building. We really needed a break. By the turn of the year, we felt motivated again to continue the van build. We had taken Lantti to our friend's garage for the winter and they had given us the chance to work there and even use their tools. On our to-do list were mostly minor things such as building a space divider between the bed and the kitchen, but also some more extensive tasks. In the high cabinet under the fridge we'd built 2 drawers, one for the chemical toilet to make it more easily accessible and one for more generic storage. For the table, we built the extension part and a mechanism to fix it in its place. The most laborious task was to build the other upper cabinet above the seats. The design was basically a carbon copy of the one we had built earlier in autumn on the left-hand side. But it was still a huge effort, partly as we did some of the steps at home and had to transport it there and back. To make the front plates of the cabinet more elegant, we cut semicircle holes into them, which we later filled with rattan. To finalize it, we crafted panels under the cabinet, with spotlights embedded into it. We used the same panels we had used for the ceiling to give it a uniform look. The last thing we did at the garage was to fill the cavities around the window. There we also added a couple of USB outputs and a 12-volt socket for charging laptops and other electrical devices. By April, winter was starting to make way for spring. It was time to get Lantti back from the winter storage and start making the final steps of the van build and prepare for the summer ahead. Mostly this period was about finalizing the back doors. We still had some Armaflex insulation left and decided to use it for the doors. To cover it all, we used grey felt carpet, which was easy to cut into shape and attach using spray glue. We also had a lot of ceiling panels left from previous summer, and we used them to cover the cavities in the back doors. If needed, they could be easily removed to access the lock mechanisms or the light wiring and components. All we had left was some minor tasks, including small areas to insulate and carpet, some battens to attach, and to create a foldable extension for the kitchen table. Building the van had become a lifestyle for us. It's what had been dominating our thoughts and free time for the past year, and it was difficult to leave it behind. But at this point, we had to admit that it's ready enough. Here's what Lantti looked like as we moved to live in it full time for the summer.